I'm excited about today's book. Can I say that?
Sure.
Okay, I'm excited about today's book. I feel like we have a lot of ground to cover before we can get to it, though.
Yes, we do. We have a plethora of follow-up items. You want to go first?
Do I have to?
I think so, since I already did my 5 brand words and you were going to do that for this time. And that's one of your items. So that should be number 1, in my opinion.
Okay. So I didn't do it.
Come on, Joe.
I know.
I want to know what your brand words are.
I know. And here's why. This is not a thing where I forgot about it at all. This is a situation where I ended up, since our last recording, I've ended up taking part of my web development business and segmenting it off to where I've technically got 2 businesses I'm running. And as a result of that, I don't want to say I'm in a crisis of sorts, but it has me reevaluating pretty much everything right now. So I'm not really sure. I spent a lot of time on this trying to figure it out, and I didn't come up with anything that I am ready to commit to at the moment. So
the TLDR is that you were too busy to do the homework from busy.
I think this has to do with, because busy is kind of at fault. Like the book itself is kind of at fault.
Right.
Between that and the Gap book that I read, between those two, it had me rethinking how I do things from a web development business stance. So therefore, I ended up changing how a lot of it operates, which means a lot more work right now. But given about a month's time, the amount of work that I'll have on my plate drops significantly, and I can already see that trajectory starting even now. So I'm on the path to be much less busy. So I'm going to blame busy for a little bit extra busy right now.
Okay. I guess I'll allow that because I think you're hitting the intention of the book anyways.
I think.
Sometimes there are seasons where you just have to push through some stuff, but as long as you are intentional moving in the right direction, then it's going to provide the long-term gains that you're looking for. It sounds like you've kind of thought through all that stuff, which is really what the 5 brand words exercise was getting at, in my opinion, is giving you that clarity. So if you kind of got that clarity already and it's influencing the decisions that you make, I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, I don't think it's bad. I mean, some of the realm that these brand words are landing on are things like stability, some white space, family time and quality time with not quality time, but quantity time with my girls. Like it's floating around those concepts, but I've not been able to fully nail it down because I'm sitting on like 12 to 15 areas that I feel like are important, but that's too many. Mm-hmm. So I'm working towards that narrow down bit, but I'm not done with that process.
Okay. So 0 for 1. What about the next one? What about listing your 15 closest friends?
I have 12 down.
Okay.
I'm going to run with that one for now. I think the problem I'm running into is like trying to get to that 15. I feel like I've met the purpose of this action item, but I'm not fully to the number that I wrote down. So I'm hesitant to say check when I'm at 12, because I feel like to go to, I almost feel like I'm going to another circle of friends, like stepping outside that realm of 12, which then means it's not necessarily 3 to fill in. It's like another 8 to 10 that tend to fall into that circle. So yes, made progress, but I'm not at that number.
If it was up to me, and maybe we need some arbitrator who is really going to keep score and decide what's allowed and what's not. But if it was up to me, I'd say that you completed that one, because I had the same experience.
Okay.
Where it's like, okay, I've got my immediate family, the 5 people I'm closest to. The next circle, is these 15 closest friends. And I had the same experience where it's like you get to 10 or 12 and it's like, I don't know if I want to put anybody else in here based on the relationship right now.
Right.
Which is why for mine, I got to my 15, but my action item on this was a little bit different. And I think that gave me the context to complete it. Was I had the additional question, how can I give to my 15? So these aren't necessarily people that I'm close to right now that I would put into the group of 15 right now. There's probably a few people in that second or third circle, you're talking about the 8 to 10 more, that they're kind of like on the fence. And maybe you want one of those relationships to be a little bit better. And so that question then of how can I give to them, that's the thing that can kind of push them up into that second tier, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that additional context for me is what allowed me to get to that number. Just an interesting observation hearing you talk about yours.
Yeah, it was an interesting exercise, and it felt really weird. I will say that. Here, let me take my friends and borderline rank them. So that's about what it felt like, and that is not a thing I will share at all. So there we go. I was even hesitant to write it down at all. I was like, I think I could just memorize this, and then I don't ever have to externalize it at all. So I did externalize it. However, it is behind like 4 passwords and encrypted. So yes.
I wrote mine down, but it's in unencrypted plain text. So anybody who wants to hack into my NVAult, you can see if you made the cut. I don't really feel bad about that, by the way. Maybe I should, but I don't know. I've gotten to the point where it's like, it is what it is. We can either both agree that maybe it's not where it's supposed to be and we can work to improve it, but I'm not going to put in effort if you're not going to either. So
that's fair. That's a fair point.
The last one you've got here, stop saying I'm busy and say I've decided not to be busy.
Yeah, I've been doing this one. I can't say I'm 100% on it. It's still, I think habit takes over on this. So I have a number of scenarios where I have simply said, I've decided not to be busy, and I'm learning what that means. I've kind of added to that phrase a little bit, because when I just say, I've decided not to be busy, people tend to look at you with this blank look like, wait, that's not the expected response. What is wrong with you?
Almost like that's not an option.
Yeah, like you're supposed to say, I'm good, or, busy. Like those are the things you're supposed to say. If you say anything other than that, you're like an alien with a third eye. Like, what is wrong with you? So, yes. I have been altering that one a little bit. So typically it's like, I've decided not to be busy, and I'm learning what that means for me. So, and that usually jump starts a conversation. I'm very aware of the scenarios when I say this and making sure that I have time to expand on it a little bit, because it naturally leads to, oh, what does that mean? Tell me more. Like it immediately begs that question. So folks tend to ask that question. So you kind of have to be aware of if you have time to expand on it or not.
Yeah, I kind of wish I was a fly on the wall for a couple of these, because I kind of think that as you explain it, you get one of two reactions. Either people are just like in shock and awe that you're able to achieve that, or they're just ticked at you and they want to murder you because they're jealous.
Yes. I've had a couple of the ladders. So it's like, okay, Joe, you're doing this thing again where you're making me feel bad about myself. Like, I don't mean to do that. Like, that's not my intent. But it's really hard to not come across that way. It's just painful sometimes.
Interesting. All right, so my turn, I guess.
Yes. You did your 15.
I did my 15, yep.
Okay. Did you stop saying, wait a minute, to your kids?
Kind of. Turns out this is impossible because my kids have no filter. So it doesn't matter what I'm doing. There are times when I know that I don't want to say, wait a minute, but I find myself having to say, wait a minute, because I'm literally in the middle of something that I can't stop doing.
Right.
But I am more intentional about it, and I do find myself not doing it, because I'm looking at my phone or whatever. Like if I'm doing something that's not a high value activity, like I've decided I should be doing this right now. For example, I've got my office finished, so I work from home. Like they'll just barge in the middle of me doing something, be like, hey, look at this, like immediately. And can't right now, guys. Like the door is closed. Yeah. You know that. So I'm in work mode. Like in that instance, I'll say, wait a minute, I'll finish up, what I'm working on and then go see what they've got. But yeah, it's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be.
I am running a table saw. You need to wait a minute. Definitely need to wait a minute.
Exactly. So there are times, when that happens. Next one, make time to help people. I think I had mentioned I was going to try and work this into my schedule. I don't have this explicitly done. It kind of goes along with write out my own rules of engagement. I have this sort of done. I don't think it's to the point yet where I'm happy with it. But I do have a document in Ulysses now, which has the different types of requests that I will get. So like, can we get lunch? Can we get coffee? Can you come into church for a staff meeting, whatever? And it really occurred to me that I could use Calendly or something like that to just share my availability. But I would have to clearly define what my availability is for these things. So for coffee, for example, I've got Mondays at 7 a.m. or Fridays at 2, lunch Tuesdays at 12 p.m. So like those are my time slots set aside for those sorts of things. And it's a little bit of trial and error, finding stuff that is going to work consistently, but I've at least started with that. And I think that a lot of that stuff overlaps with the make time to help people, but I don't have like a helping people time block on my calendar yet.
Nice. So you were talking about your rules of engagement.
Yep.
Did you write those out technically?
Kind of. So they're not done yet. I would say this one is probably not completed. I've got the availability, but next I want to put in context of like, these are the places and the rules around, okay, so we're going to meet for coffee. Like these are the available options. We can go here or here, and what are the expectations? I kind of made this mindset shift that like, if I'm going to meet somebody for coffee, I'm just going to buy them coffee. It costs me a couple bucks, build some goodwill. Like those are the kinds of things that I want to put in a formal document that don't exist yet. Right now, it's just the availability.
Nice.
So it's a step in the right direction, but it's definitely not done.
I feel like that could be really helpful. Like just to know if we're going to do X, Y, and Z, these are the boundaries I need to put around it. And this is very plain. I use it all the time. It's borderline protocol. Like I feel like that would be very freeing in some way or another.
Yeah, I kind of think so as well, which is why I'm doing it. Speaking of boundaries, my wife found this book and I think she submitted it as a recommendation. It's actually called Boundaries, and it's one of the books that Dave Ramsey refers to all the time. I don't have it in front of me, but it came today. I bought it because it looks really interesting. It's basically like, here's how you set up those boundaries, the firm boundaries around when you can say yes and how to say no, sort of a thing.
I have read this book.
Have you? Okay.
I have.
I feel like that'll help a lot.
Yeah.
So I want to read that.
Those guys are, because I think it's co-authored, right? There's 2 authors on it.
Yes.
They like their lists, so you'll get along with them well. They have a good framework for helping you identify that, and it's something that my wife and I tend to refer to quite a bit. It's like I can't change their actions, but I can change my response to their actions. And that, I think, has been extremely helpful for us with a handful of family situations that we needed to navigate and still need to navigate. So I do recommend that book. That's a good one to help you work through some of that.
Cool. All right. The other ones I've got here: create a monthly plan template and identify the 4 things from my balanced scorecard. So I did these and I kind of went overboard. I sent you a picture of something that I had designed and printed off, which combines both of these. So the monthly plan template, if you go online and you search for either weekly or monthly templates, planning templates, you'll find a bunch of them. But I didn't really like any of them. And as I was looking at those and recognizing that I had already designed my daily template and I'm using that and I really like it, it's helping out a lot, I'm like, well, maybe I should do the same thing with the monthly template. And then from there, obviously, it's, well, what's going to go on here? And so the idea behind the 4 things for my balanced scorecard, at least the way I remember it, is that I want to make sure that I'm doing the things that are moving the needle and helping me achieve the goals that are important to me. So if you think about that from the 12-week year framework, you've got like your goals for the quarter, which I'm already writing down every day. And then from there, the idea is that you're developing habits. You're doing the things consistently that are going to help you achieve those goals. And so when I'm thinking about what do I want to plan or what do I want to execute on in a given month, it kind of occurred to me that I should probably incorporate that sort of stuff into the monthly template. So I've got this like 1-page thing, which has on the top third, I guess, like the five weeks, and you can fill in the boxes for the days, and it's 7 days a week. The weekends are shaded a slightly different color. And I use that to write down the major deadlines that I have for that particular month. And there's not a lot of space on there because I don't want to stack a whole bunch of things that I have to deliver at the same time. I want to be able to see that the things I'm committed to, like they're kind of spread out, if that makes sense.
Yep, makes sense to me.
Okay, and then at the bottom of every day, there are 3 small circles, which you're probably like, what the heck?
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, what is this?
Okay.
Are we sharing this in the show notes?
Yeah, I guess you can. At least the picture. I'm not going to share the PDF yet.
Okay. I'm just asking because there's like logos and stuff on this that I don't know.
Yeah, maybe you can white that out or something. I don't know.
Okay.
But I'll share it, if nothing else, to give people some ideas. And then I've got my life theme, which I mentioned. That's actually a result of one of the books that we've read for Bookworm. I can't remember which one specifically because I feel like it was a culmination of a couple different ones. But again, I want to make sure that everything that I'm planning is in line with what I consider my individual purpose. And then I've got goal number 1, goal number 2, goal number 3. So these are my up to 3 quarterly goals. And underneath that, on the left half of each, so you've got goal 1, that goes like all the way across the page. And then on the left half of that, you've got progress goals. So 1, 2, and 3, these are kind of like the major milestones that would happen for this particular goal. And then to the right of that, tasks and habits, 1, 2, 3, and then 3 small circles to the right of that. The idea here being that you would identify the habits that you want to do consistently, and you would color code those. And then when you complete those, you would color in the dot on the day under the master your month is the name of it, like on the actual calendar. So you're not doing, 3 habits for goal number 1, 3 habits for goal number 2, and 3 habits for goal number 3 every day. But you want to make sure that you are moving things in the right direction. So maybe all of your goals or all of the tasks and habits under goal number 1 are shaded red, and then you just want to make sure that you've got enough red dots on your month. So it's kind of like planning your month plus a habit tracker at the same time.
Nice. It looks cool.
Thanks.
I feel like this is something that would work really well for you. I think this would be overkill for me.
Probably. And to be honest, I don't know that it's going to work really well for me either, but it's an experiment based off of the follow-up items here. So
okay.
As I was thinking about it, I'm like, well, there's got to be a more efficient way to combine these things. They seem like they're kind of related. And so putting them on this document, I guess we can follow up again and see how it goes. The problem being, for me anyways, I kind of did my 12-week year wrong for quite a while.
Okay.
And I have as one of my goals this quarter to run a half marathon, but I've actually been training for that for the last year. So the half marathon, as we record this, is Saturday. So my 12-week year goal then is done at that point. And so all of the stuff that would have been the habits, like the going for a run, like that's no longer going to appear on
Got
here.
it.
So I guess I should have had that as a goal, when I was actually implementing the habits. Retrospectively, I guess like that's a mistake that I made. But the other 2 I can definitely track on here.
Makes sense. This is very intriguing to me. Like I do a thing for my week. Like we talked about that a little bit last time. And I know you've got one similar to this, and you mentioned it earlier, that's on a weekly basis. But this is intriguing, like to try to do some form of tracking or overview on a monthly basis. It's borderline like monthly review sort of thing, but you're using it on a daily basis to keep yourself in alignment. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah, kind of. So this is kind of the sweet spot, I think, with the daily plan that I do. And then just having this also, like I know there are a lot of people who will write out their entire week. But when I was thinking about planning out my month versus planning out my week every week, it just seemed like a lot of physical paper. Maybe if I were to combine all these things into one notebook, like the self-journal or something, then it makes more sense. But I didn't want to have to keep track of all these different things. And when I do my weekly review, typically what I'm doing is I'm looking at the calendar and I'm identifying, when am I going to have a big time block here for focused writing or deep work or whatever. When am I going to record podcasts? Those sorts of things. And those don't change a whole lot. My, at least, work schedule is pretty steady, I guess. There's not a whole lot of variation there. Now that I've got my home office, that helps a lot. So this was more valuable, I thought, than doing it every single week. I kind of feel like I can see the benefit of doing it every single day. And I know that I can look through my calendar for the week ahead on a Sunday, but it felt like I wasn't going to get as much benefit from physically writing all of that out every single week than it would have been to just think about the whole month in advance.
So you're skipping ahead.
Kind of. I'm trying to minimize the amount of manual effort I have to put into this.
Yeah. Work the plan. Don't spend all your time planning.
Yeah, exactly. So I know that there's some people, like the weekly plan is the thing that's really going to stick for them. So yeah, I think you're right that this is going to be probably tailored to the way that I work, but I don't know, maybe it'll work for other people too.
Yeah, because I know if I try to do something on a monthly basis, and I've tried this a handful of times, and the problem I have is 1 week can drastically change what I'm going to do the following week. And in the tech world, things just move too fast. For example, I had a client email this morning and led to a phone call early the afternoon, and now I'm possibly traveling for work, which is not a thing I've done in my web development business at all outside of like local businesses. This would be out of the country. So that's completely different, but it would mean like next week would be completely shot if that goes through. So like the whole concept of planning that whole thing ahead of time, like it's going to fall apart every single time. And it ends up being, I wouldn't say it's a waste of time, but the amount of value I get out of doing it is very small in comparison to the effort required to put it into it. But given your work environment and how you do things, like I could see how weeks ahead of time when certain projects should be wrapping up and the work that it takes to get to those points. Like that months ahead of time sometimes. So I could easily see like this being extremely helpful in that scenario.
Yeah, and a lot of the projects that I'm balancing, they're kind of like side stuff. Like I'll just use Screencast Online as an example. Like I'm not working on Screencast Online modules every single day. When I do those, it's extra effort, but I do it because I love it and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I've got the schedule. I know exactly when my modules are supposed to be delivered for. Don typically does it like in 6-month increments. So I think through June. And so I've got those deadlines, and I want to know when I'm planning my month when that's going to be, because that means like about a week to 2 weeks before that, I really have to get serious about trying to carve out that extra time. And, there's other things that I've been working on, which is why you're going to have to blot out that logo. But
super secret project alert.
Yeah. It's basically to borrow a term from Eric Fisher and Jim Woods when they wrote one of those books that I read a long time ago. They talked about hustling in the margins. That really resonated with me. It's like finding those little pockets of time that you can use to move the needle on these things, which aren't going to be part of the daily cadence. So I think that's kind of the sweet spot here is like I've got certain deadlines that I need to plan around, and then I have certain habits that I want to establish, which are going to move the needle on those other projects. So yeah, this should be, anyways, the ideal template for me.
So the theory is that with some of this structure and with some of these outlines, it makes you less frantic, right? Is that the idea? Which then keeps you from bleeding over the franticness with your family. You see what I did there?
That's a very nice segue, Joe Bulig. Well done.
So our book today, as I've been itching to kind of get to, I guess, The 3 Big Questions for a Frantic Family by Patrick Lencioni. And this was my choice of a book, and I chose it primarily because it was recommended by Mrs. Rachel Schmitz. So I'm hoping Mike doesn't squirm too much today, and I'm hoping you've done some of this, given your wife wanted us to go through it.
Yeah, this could be an uncomfortable episode for me. But
Okay, sure. I will say, first impressions of this, my initial thought was, number one, I'm not sure I need this book because I don't feel like our family is frantic. I don't feel like we're running around a lot. I see a lot of families who, and we talked about this last time with Busy, like families have a lot going on in today's world. That's just kind of the cultural norm right now. And I can't say that our family really fits that mold too well. We're very protective of spending a lot of time together and making sure that every night of the week is not booked and that we don't have more than one thing going on a night. Like, we're very protective of that. So first impression on this was, okay, this will be a fun book. It'll make for some good topics to talk about, but I don't really see this as something that applies to our family and our lives together. So having read it, I can tell you that is a wrong assumption. So I did really enjoy this, but I'm interested. What was your initial take on this, Mike?
Well, I really like Patrick Lencioni. In fact, I'm going to hear him speak when I go to the EntreLeadership Summit as we record this in a couple weeks.
Nice.
In San Antonio. My initial response to this was, it's a business book that's been repurposed, and I think that's pretty accurate.
Yes.
Which is a little bit a little bit strange, I guess. But there's lots of good stuff in here. At the very beginning, when he's talking about part one and the problem, he shares the schedule that these people have. And it's very close to ours.
Okay.
So I didn't have the response that you did of like, oh, our family isn't frantic. Like, I am resigned to the fact that we are a frantic family, but I also think that like, unless you were to move to the middle of the woods somewhere, you don't really have an option. What you can control, though, is what you are frantic about and what you choose to allow in. And if you aren't intentional about that, then you're going to get other people who are going to sign you up for all this stuff. You're going to be overcommitted to all these things that you don't really want to do. And that's when you feel frantic. But just walking through the schedule here, and maybe this is because your kids are a little bit younger and you don't have like a Monday swim practice and piano for the twins. Like,
and I will say that our oldest is now going into formal homeschooling, and there's one or two like outside classes and lessons per week that we're talking about. So I feel like although right now we don't fit that mold, I think that's purely a factor of the age of our children.
Yeah, you're on the precipice. So
yeah,
my Mondays, for example, we've had to figure this out. And that's the thing is like, you can solve it, you can figure it out. But like our Mondays, I've got a couple different meetings. We record the productivity show live on Monday afternoons. And so we've got 3 kids in piano on Monday afternoons. So my wife will typically bring them to the music. It's a music store that does lessons like in the second floor. So, and it happens to be like a couple blocks from the co-working space. So she'll take them there. I will meet her there when I'm done recording the podcast, and then she will leave and I will stay, and then I'll bring whoever's left home. Like, that's just the kind of thing where if you've never done it before, you're like, oh my gosh, this is way too much work. But then after you get in the rhythm, it's just like, but it is what it is. Like, it's not that bad. We can plan around that. And then he mentions in the book, Tuesdays, soccer practice for all the girls. One of the parents coaches on Wednesdays, swimming and Girl Scouts. The wife has a Bible study. Thursday, she volunteers in the classroom. There's soccer. Friday, there's usually a sleepover, a birthday party. Saturday, swim meets. We just got done with soccer at the Y. We were at the Y from like 8:30 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon because we had so many kids in soccer, one right after the other. So like, I feel their pain, I guess. But if you view it through the lens of we've chosen to do all these things, it's completely different than like, oh my gosh, look at all these things that we have to do. And I resent every single thing because I haven't taken the time to identify the ones that we really want to do.
It kind of sounds like a nightmare to me, but okay.
It's not that bad. I mean, and I don't want to just make an excuse for being busy with a family. Like, you don't have to even have a family. You can be busy with a whole bunch of things. And you can be in the same situation and feeling the exact same thing as like, oh my gosh, how do I escape this? I just want to move somewhere where no one knows me and I don't have any commitments and I can just live in my cabin by the woods, And some people do that. Some people will just pick up and move and get a fresh start, whether they have a family or not. So I understand the process there, but really, like, if you recognize that what you have right now is a result of the choices that you've made previously, you're in complete control. Like, we've talked about the whole idea of responsibility. Like, take responsibility for your own schedule and recognize that you have the power to change it. You're not going to just snap your fingers and all this stuff is going to be gone tomorrow, but you can start making decisions right away, which are going to move you in the direction that you want. If your rallying cry, which we'll get to in a little bit, is I want to be less busy, I want a more minimalist schedule, like, you have the ability to craft the life that you want. But if you don't craft the life, if you're not intentional about crafting the life that you want, then you'll get stuck just doing what everybody else wants you to do.
All right, I want to share this quote. So Patrick Lencioni, when he writes a book, he writes a fable, and it's usually 3/4 of the book where he's telling a story. Like, it's a fiction story to portray the concepts and the ideas that he is trying to get across. And that's one of the reasons I think we love his books, at least I do. And I've read, this is the 3rd book of his that I've been through now, and I've loved all of them. Like, I just love him as an author. He does a great job trying to get those things across. I will say, though, he is a corporate guy, so he's using terms and phrases
that comes across.
Yeah, it's like, okay, dude, like, sure, rallying cry. Yeah, I've heard that in corporate terms quite a bit. Basically, what's the most important thing we should be doing the next few months? Like that. Okay, great. let's bring it down to real world terminology. Like, I have a thing against that, but that aside, I really like the way he writes. And within this story, he's chronicling the journey of a husband and wife, primarily the wife, who is just overwhelmed with all the stuff that's going on in life. And the rest of the story is the process that they go through to help her get to the point where she's not overwhelmed and the family is able to set a path to move forward. And the whole journey starts when the husband in the mix makes a comment, because he's a consultant and he consults companies on how to run their businesses and how to achieve the goals and the missions of their company. And he makes the statement, if my clients ran their companies the way we run this family, they'd be out of business.
I may or may not have said something similar in the past.
Okay. Nice. Did it go over well?
No, it went over about as well as it did in this book.
Yes, it didn't go well, obviously. It's just a fascinating journey that whole quote goes throughout the book.
Yeah, I have a couple of issues with the framing with this question. And Patrick Lencioni tries to be very careful to make the husband appear sympathetic. Like, he's trying to justify, I didn't say you, I said we, you know?
Yep.
But the thing that really bothered me about this is the flippancy with the way that he said it, and his whole attitude is like, well, I can control what happens at work, but I can't control what happens with my family. And I guess this is just me personally, because I've been there and I've gotten that revelation that, like, you can control what happens in your family. And I personally believe that as the father here, like, you're responsible for this. Like, it's if you were to rephrase this, you should say, if my clients ran their companies the way that I have allowed this family to operate, they'd be out of business. And I know it's not just the man's responsibility. The husband and wife, like, you are a team, but like everything we've talked about in terms of responsibility, you can't control what the other person is going to do. You can only control what you do, and you can take responsibility for the outcome and you can try to improve it. And by phrasing it this way, it's kind of like, the way I read it anyways, is well, it is what it is and there's nothing I can do about it. Did you have the same reaction, or am I just overthinking this?
I didn't go down this path at all with this.
Well, I found myself getting a little bit mad at Jude, who's the guy.
All right.
And Teresa, like, the whole story is about how she's doing all this research and she's understanding this. Like, this guy knows this. He teaches this system to his clients every day, and he never bothered to explain it to his wife. Like, hey, we should try to do this. And I know, like, there's different scenarios when you can do that and when you can't do that. But I mean, if you've got the answer, then you should look for ways to cast that vision. You shouldn't just be resigned to the fact that, like, well, I can't control my wife, I can't control my kids, my family's out of control, that we're frantic. Like, there's nothing we can do until they change. That's kind of the narrative that isn't explicitly told, but kind of what I got is, like, the wife, Teresa, she's the one who's seeking out and trying to understand all this, and she's getting excited about it and telling everybody. And Jude's just, like, sitting on his hands and he's along for the ride. You know, she figures this stuff out. She has some questions and he does it every day. So she's like, hey, can you kind of help me clarify this? And I just, like, dude, if you would have taken responsibility for this, it never would have gotten here.
I also don't know, like, there may be a part of Teresa's personality that he's aware of that we're not, too.
Yep.
And I hesitate to get onto him for this because, and this is partly because my wife and I somewhat operate in the same way, in that if I came out and said, you know, here's the way this should work and this is the way this should operate, I'm going to get some resistance right away. And it's because she hasn't had time to process the whole situation. And one of the action items that I'm going to talk about a little bit later in more detail is that I wanted to go through these 3 questions, which we'll get to also later. And my wife did not read this, so she doesn't have the background on it. But at the same time, I know that the best way that she's going to process this is if I let her know this is a crazy idea that I want to work through, and these are the questions I want to try to answer as a couple and for our family, and letting her know that 1 or 2 days before the actual conversation is going to happen. Like, I have to do that for her sake and whenever I see like what Jude is doing in the story with Teresa, there's a lot of this where he knows how things operate in the companies that he works with. He tries to share that from time to time, and yet Teresa does continue to stay up all night to work through this, even though he had already explained how the process works, or, in this case, his business partner ended up doing some of it too. So there's a lot of this where he's helping, but I don't know if he is restraining himself because he's tired of talking about this and just can't do it anymore because he's been doing it all day, or if he understands how his wife operates and is trying to meet her where she is and trying to let her work through it in her own ways, because that's the better way for her to learn in that process.
I get that, but I just think it's an example of not this story specifically, but where the story starts is an example of failed leadership. I mean, the story starts with her being ticked at him because of something he said.
Yeah.
And in the words of Julius from Remember the Titans, attitude reflect leadership, Captain.
Yes.
So regardless of where you locate yourself in terms of roles and responsibilities within the marriage, and I don't really care. I don't think it's really relevant. What is relevant, I guess, is my perspective on like personal leadership and how I always want to be working on myself and become a better leader. And I just look at Jude and I'm like, he doesn't have it.
Yeah.
At least not right now. And it made me a little bit mad because it's not just him it affects. It affects his wife and it affects his kids. And fortunately, the wife steps up. Otherwise, like, how long do they have to deal with this?
Yes. And I don't want to come across as saying Jude's not in the wrong here, because I would agree with you that it does start off with failed leadership for sure. And I would also pin that on him as well. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's correct in the way he handled it. I'm just asking the question because I'm not sure that I want to be one that says he did this incorrectly when he obviously is going to know his wife better than we do just from reading this short story about her and her journey through this. So I don't want to say that he's wrong, but at the same time, I don't want to say that he's completely right either, because obviously there's a problem. And you and I would say that he is the leader of that family and their marriage. So obviously it is his responsibility to do something about this. And even after the situation has come up and he is aware of the problem, even then it's borderline on whether or not you can say that he took the leadership on that or not. And in most cases, the answer is he didn't. He didn't fully step up to that situation. So again, like I have kind of conflicting interests on this one, simply because I feel like he's going to know how to help his wife understand this to a better degree than we will. And at the same time, given what we know, I would hope that he would get more involved in the process to be more of a help to his wife in that situation.
Yeah, well, I'll go out on the limb and say he messed up, say he's wrong. But I don't think it has anything to do with the traditional view of like the man is leader of the family either. I just think that in this scenario, you see the growth mindset displayed by the wife, but not the husband. And that just kind of ticks me off.
Yeah.
The next section in part 2, business school, I wrote down, I don't know if this was a question that they actually posed or if this was just my own musing, but why is a family not viewed as an organization? It really is. And if you think about it, for marriages that end in divorce, the marriage has failed. The family has failed. And in that sense, like the CEO is getting fired, regardless of who you define as the CEO or co-CEOs or whatever. But you see this everywhere. I mean, professional sports, if a team doesn't meet expectations, the head coach gets fired. Now, that's the place that everybody wants to get to. Everybody who's coaching, they want to be the head coach because they get paid the most. They get all the glory, but you have to qualify yourself. And the way you do that is by taking responsibility for the outcome, not by sitting on the fringes and letting the other person figure it out. And so I think that for me, this book, The 3 Big Questions for a Frantic Family, it's a business book adapted to a family context. And I kind of was like, why do we have to have a book which shows that you can do that? I feel like I've done that with several of the books that we've read, and it just was like shocking to me in a sense that, well, wait, people don't view a family as an organization? Like, there's a lot of parallels here. It's pretty plain to me to see the connections here and a lot of the similarities, but obviously, I'm unique, I guess, in that view, because he mentioned at the outro of this book, I think that's one of the things he got asked all the time was, well, how do I apply this to a family context? So I understand it from that perspective.
I think you're weird.
I guess.
Well, this is the way it's phrased. Why is a family not viewed as an organization? I think that is possibly a new concept to a lot of people. I'm hesitant to say most, just because I feel like this is something that does come up a lot, but I don't know where. Like, I have no reference points to say percentage-wise, like 73% of people are going to think. Like, I don't have anything like that. But this is a question that was brought up in the book, by the way. So I do recall this question being asked when Teresa asked Jude, well, why don't people view families as an organization? And he didn't have an answer for that. It's like, well, I suppose it works. Like, he's trying to translate it, but
that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like,
yeah,
really, buddy, you can't connect these dots.
I can say that I could probably resonate with folks who don't always see it that way. Simply because, like, I know that there are some of these things you should do as a family. Like, you should be putting together a family mission statement and working on goals together as a family. But making that jump from that point to saying my family is like an organization or a company in some sorts and it needs to operate that way, like, that's almost too far to me.
Company, I'd agree. That is too far.
Yeah, like that was the impression I got whenever this question came up in the book. Like, okay, you want me to think of this as the way that I run my business. Like, that's way different. Like, that doesn't work. But at the same time, like, a business or a company, that's more formal than what they're referring to when they say organization. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. So I don't think that viewing your family as an organization is bad or wrong, and it is probably a good thing. It's just not something I have explicitly considered or thought through in the past.
Yeah. I mean, really what it comes down to is, what is a family? Like, how do you answer that question? And you have to answer it at some point, I feel. And if you do answer it, you'll be able, it's not too much of a stretch to say that, well, yeah, it's basically an organization. The company analogy I don't like, because I feel like with companies, specifically with the work culture today, like, you don't work for the same company for the rest of your life. You have a job until you find a better job, or, there really isn't that loyalty built in anymore in a freelance sense. Like, if you're working on a project and it's not profitable, you kill the project. Well, you're not going to axe your kids.
Well, depends.
So there's definitely limits to that analogy, but an organization, I feel like that's broad enough that it makes sense. And maybe we should get into the 6 questions here for the organizational clarity, because I think that this kind of illustrates my point of, like, how you can apply these to a family context without needing an interpreter to dumb it down into 3 specific questions. And this right here, this is a great example of how Patrick Lencioni is the business mind, and he's trying to adapt this to a family context.
Yes.
I think, honestly, if the fable had been changed and it was just these 6 questions, I would have liked the book more, honestly. Because I would have figured out how to apply it to my family. I appreciate the fable and the model that he puts forth for people who need a little bit more support in that. And maybe that's also, just to clarify, partly based on my position right now. We talked about the syntopical reading in episode 42, how to read a book, how you balance what you're reading now against everything else that you've ever read. Well, I've got a lot more context now when I'm going through this book than I would have had I read this 2 years earlier, for example. But the 6 clarifying questions. What is the ultimate reason you are in business, which is your core purpose? Number 2, what are the essential characteristics inherent in your organization that you could never knowingly violate? These are your core values. Number 3, what specifically does your company do and for whom, which is your business definition? Number 4, how do you go about doing what you do in a way that differentiates you from your competitors and gives you an advantage? That's your strategy. Number 5, what is your biggest priority and what do you need to accomplish it? Those are your goals. And number 6, I wrote this down wrong. Maybe you can help me out. I have what has to do and what to achieve your goal. What do you have to do to achieve your goals?
What has to happen?
What has to happen to achieve your goals, which is your roles and responsibilities.
Where do you want to go with this? Because I appreciate the dumbed down version that we get to later. Because to me, these 6 questions, like Teresa in the book tries to answer all of these for their family, and she goes through it. She feels like it's a great thing that she's able to answer these, and gets so excited about it that she invites some friends over and takes them through it. And then, what was it, like 2 weeks go by and she hasn't really heard anything from her friends at all, like good or bad. So she reaches out to them and no one has done the 6 questions. Like they're all like, oh, it's too much work. It's too much to do. So like I can resonate with the friends. Like, are you kidding me? Like this is a lot of work to work through. Like this is a lot to do.
Yeah, and I can understand that as well. And I think that a couple of things that I wrote down here, which is kind of like the 80-20 of this. So I naturally did, I guess, what he does in the rest of the fable when I read these. Like number 4, how do you go about doing what you do in a way that differentiates you from your competitors and gives you an advantage? So what makes you different? I think that's a lot easier to answer than the question that he put forth, but ultimately that's what it's asking. And that's something that you can apply on so many levels. You know, it's not just the organization and it's not just the family context. You could do this on an individual basis as well. And I guess maybe that comes back to my life theme. You know, I want to help people discover their purpose. I want to help them connect to their calling, to do what they were created to do. And so maybe I just am coming to this with the pump already primed, so to speak. But like, it wasn't much of a leap for me to reword that, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yes, but you're one of these weird people that can do that really easily.
Okay. Well, another example. What specifically does your company do and for whom? Like, there's only one word you need to change there in order to apply this.
True.
So what specifically does your family do and for whom? You know, and then really, if you were to boil that down, make it even simpler, it's like a 1-sentence definition of what it is that you do. To be honest, like a lot of these questions, the real value is just in asking the question. There's not a right or wrong answer, so to speak. It's just that most people will never sit down and ask themselves that question. I mentioned I've got my life theme. I don't have a 1-sentence definition for my family yet. We'll get to action items in a little bit here. So that's that one. And then there's another section here on the core values. And again, I hate the way he phrases, because it's so much more complicated than it needs to be. Even in a business context, this is ridiculous. What are the essential characteristics inherent in your organization that you could never knowingly violate? How about just something like, what makes you you? What are your core values? And he does define, a couple different types of core values here. So do you want to go through these real quick?
Sure. That'll help set the stage for some of the stuff I want to talk about later.
Yeah. And to be honest, I don't really like all these different categories. I think it makes it too complicated, but I understand them. So there's aspirational values. These are values that you want to be known for. There's permission to play values. So these are like the table stakes. If you're going to be a part of this family, we're going to do this thing, or part of this company, part of this organization. This is what we're going to do. And then there's the accidental values, the ones that kind of happen by default because, fill in the blank. There's a lot of different reasons. But I kind of think that core values is fine, and it could encompass all of these. The core values that we have written down for our family, we know that those are aspirational. And just the fact that we've written them down and put them, I mentioned on the podcast before, and I could add an image if you want to see it again, but we've got our Schmitz family core values that a friend of mine did a manifesto type graphic, and it's hanging on our living room wall. Those are aspirational values, but we don't live up to them 100% of the time. But just the fact that they are printed out and they're up on the wall, we're much more likely to walk those out. And so it kind of takes care of the accidental values and the permission to play values in my experience. And just having to identify 3 different categories instead of, what are your 5 core values makes this much less likely that it's going to happen.
We have like what previously we've called like a family mission statement. And I would argue that is probably like an aspirational value in one statement. And I think that's helpful But the trick there is like you got to do something with these. And I think that was the problem in the book was these 6 questions. Once you get these answered, it's just going to die unless you do something with it. Like unless you have some form of like a weekly meeting or something. Like you've talked about this before, Mike, with your family having this weekly get together where you talk about this stuff. And that sort of thing, like on a company level, is very important. So that's a thing that you have to do. But if you have like an aspirational mission statement or vision, it's going to die unless you have it front and center and you talk about it a lot and make decisions based on it. And that's something, I think that aspect is probably the more important piece, but it's the least applied piece in that process.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of jumping around here, but in the very end of the book, he's got some different examples of families that have implemented this. And there's a quote on page 203, which really encapsulates, I think, what you're talking about. It says, we're finally tackling these things now because they're part of our focused stated priorities. When something is part of a bigger goal, but I know we are going to be talking about it every week, it's harder for me to let it get pushed aside by those pesky, tactical, and artificially urgent things that distract us from what really matters. Now I can let some things go that I would have felt guilty about ignoring in the past when everything was equally important. Now our family has real clarity. And I think you can achieve that clarity by simply throwing out where you want to go and then talking about it regularly. I don't think you need a big complicated scorecard, and you don't need automated software, which is going to update all the things. Like, you don't need to make it super complicated. I think what you hit on, having the aspirational values, setting the vision for where we're going, and then checking in consistently. And yes, there's value in tracking that you're doing the right things. I mean, I talked at the beginning about how I have created this ridiculous template to track my habits. So I get it. Like, there's value in doing that. But for a family, I think if you are coming to this new, the 80-20 here is just identify your aspirational values, your vision of where you want to go, and then once a week talk about it. And if you do that, you'll make a lot of progress, whether you implement the rest of it or not.
That's a fair point. I think the weekly meeting bit is the primary focus of that whole bit there, though.
Yep. Let's go into part 3,
okay,
which is titled Trial and Error, but the big section here is the thematic goal. So that's exactly what we were just talking about. This is the rallying cry. Now, in the book, he talks about the rallying cry being surrounded by defining objectives and then standard objectives. There is no way I'm getting my wife to identify defining objectives and standard objectives by using those terms in our family meeting. It makes no sense. And he's got the visual, so you can implement it, just call the boxes something else if you want.
Right. Yeah. This was one of my big complaints in the book is like, okay, the purpose of this section is to take the corporate speak we just heard in those 6 questions and redefine it as 3 questions that we're getting ready to get to, but to do that in a way that is applicable directly and targeted at a family. Like, that is your goal here, is to take these 6 corporate speak questions and redefine them in a way that applies to the suburban life, I guess. They're in suburban areas, but he doesn't do that. He continues to use some of the same terminology. Like, sure, great, let's put together a rallying cry, but that's a corporate term. Like, let's talk about the most important thing to do in the next 2 to 6 months, and let's not talk about core objectives or standard objectives. Let's talk about the tactics that we need to go through to actually achieve this goal, like the things we need to do day to day to do this. And let's talk about, do you get what I'm saying? Like, this is the terminology I wanted to change, but he didn't. And it's like, okay, you had a chance here and you didn't take it.
I could care less if the defining objectives and standard objectives get updated. I want the meal plan for the week updated. I mean, there's things that are more important that are going to make a frantic family situation a lot smoother, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of value in, like I said, identifying where we want to go and then having the meeting to talk about these things. But this just seems like unnecessary tracking if you're having trouble, which, I mean, the very start of this book, we're in this situation where we don't want to be. And the husband and wife are talking about, well, maybe we should just move. Like, I've had those conversations before.
Yeah.
Oh, it'd be great if we could just move, and then we could start over. But that's not an option. Like, you can't just run away from the problem. It's still going to be there. And so I don't know. I mean, if you put yourself in that situation and ask, like, what's the best thing that I could do right now? Going back to the Matt Perman book, what's best next? It's not defining objectives and standard objectives for our family. If you're in that situation, there's a lot of things that would provide a greater return before that. But the thematic goal, the rallying cry, I'm completely behind this idea.
Do you want to go through the 3 questions? We've been alluding to this for the last hour now.
Yeah, and actually, let me just explain a little bit more about this thematic goal and how you would implement this according to the book. Because I do think that, honestly, where we are right now, this is a cool idea. And this is one of my action items. I want to implement a simpler version of this. So the thematic goal, the rallying cry, this is really what is important to your family right now. It doesn't have to be written in stone. It can change. But what is your rallying cry right now? And if you're in a frantic situation, then maybe the rallying cry is simplicity or margin or downtime, fill in the blank with whatever you want to achieve. Then from there, you identify the defining objectives and the standard objectives. I think the best way to describe this is like the big, if you were to apply this from a 12-week year perspective, you've got your rallying cry. That's like the one goal that you're working towards. And then you've got your progress goals. So these are the things, the milestones that you can hit that are contributing to the big goal. And then as you go the next level down, you've got the little things, the tasks and the habits, for example, that you can do consistently to move in the right direction. And he mentions, Patrick Lencioni does in the book, the scorecard in essence is the big goal on the top, the defining objectives underneath that, the standard objectives underneath that. And then you've got these circles underneath each box, which are going to indicate whether you're doing well or not in that particular area. And he mentions 3 colors, red, yellow, and green, where green is we're doing good and red is we're not. And you can, he mentions, like, if it's in between yellow and green, feel free to use light green if you want. I think that's complicating it too much. If you've got 5 different levels, for example, for these things.
Don't do that. That's not an option. So the listeners, don't ignore that. That's not an option. It's red, yellow, green, done.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've mentioned it just because it's in the book. And immediately when I thought of when he said that was, okay, so now we have to have clarification for this particular objective, red, orange, yellow, light green, and dark green. And multiply that for all of the objectives. That's ridiculous. And then it's going to be that no one's going to update that, at least in my family situation. So I like the idea, but I really want to make it simple. And really, it's got to be something that's just going to allow us to see at a glance whether we are moving in the right direction. That's all I want from this exercise, is just to know, are we doing the right things? Because you can either look at the lead measures or the lag measures, going back to, 40X? The lead measures, these are the things that we know are going to get us where we want to go. That's what we want to track. Are we doing the right things? If your goal is to lose weight, are you getting to the gym? Are you going for a run? And then the lag measures, that's the stuff after the fact. Do we have more free time? Or in the weight loss or the working out example, have I lost weight? But looking at the lag measures is just going to tell you whether what you did previously worked or not. And when it comes to really any situation, but specifically as we're talking about here, like a frantic family situation, if you give any amount of thought to this, you can identify the drivers which are going to alleviate whatever pain point you're trying to solve.
And I will note that, and we're going to go through these questions, but there are a handful of examples of these systems, like these whole outlines on, people answering these questions and what does it actually look like. I think that is one of the more helpful pieces of this book that we haven't really talked about, and that is at the back. It's part of the appendices in the back, and I found it helpful to read through these. I don't know if you did this or not, Mike, but going through the 3 questions and then trying to determine, okay, well, what are the answers to these for our family, and using these as a guide to say, okay, so we're not crazy when we say XYZ. So I found those extremely helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And this is kind of the thing that's a little bit weird, because he took the 6 questions and brought it down to 3 questions. So it's simplified. And then looking at these 3 questions, there is no way that you need the complicated reporting scorecard that he outlined earlier.
Yeah.
Literally, you could just follow these 3 questions to the T and get the majority of the benefit, in my opinion. And I feel like the additional examples that he gave with the scoring the thematic goal, that just makes it more complicated. It doesn't need to be that complicated. And we can talk about maybe when we get to question number 3, what my wife and I do, because we're constantly iterating our family weekly meetings. And I really am happy with what we've landed on right now. But it's really simple. It's just asking the right questions. So jumping into the 3 questions, the first one, what makes your family unique? Do you want to do all of them right now and then talk about them, or just do them one at a time?
Let's go through all 3 of them and then come back and work our way back through them.
Okay, so number 1, what makes your family unique? Number 2, what is your family's rallying cry right now? Question 3 then is, how do you talk about and use the answers to these questions? That's it.
Yeah.
Super simple. But anybody who reads that should feel like they have enough direction to get started, I would think, but also not too much structure or detail where they're going to be paralyzed by, oh my gosh, this is just way too hard. Just leave it there, Patrick. Just stop right there.
Yeah. Let me tell a story here, just for fun, because last night, so as we're recording this, last night, my wife and I booked a babysitter and we went on a date and we answered this stuff and we did this. And I was the one leading it and working our way through it and trying to, I guess, decorporatize a lot of this even after it's simplified, and taking these questions and trying to help our family and help my wife and I work through, what is the most important thing we should be working on right now. And this is why I keep using some of these phrases and changing some of the terms, because whenever I'm conveying this to Becky, like this is not something that I'm going to use the term, like I'm not going to use the same terms he does, because my wife and I have a thing against terminology like that. So, when I ask the question, like, what makes your family unique? Like, what makes us different? And again, remember what I said earlier, I had to ask these questions at least 24 hours ahead of time so that whenever we get on our date and we start to have this conversation, she has had her time to process this sort of thing. I can do it on the fly. Like, I think on my feet a lot of times. So, you ask me a question like this and I can usually come up with the answer for it that I agree with in wholly, but she needs that time to process. So I asked her these questions ahead of time, and then we started to work through those. And with the first one, it's like, what makes your family unique? And if you read the examples in the back, they're like 3 and 4 sentence paragraphs, and that doesn't really work for us. And we ended up with a 1 sentence, almost a directive of sorts. And I'll share the answers to this stuff later when it makes more sense. But we ended up doing a single sentence because for us that makes more sense. But it was more about what is the guiding direction that we are on. And it ended up being different than what I thought it would be. But I didn't see it as, let's put together this paragraph of all these different aspects that make us different. Like, no, there's really 1, maybe 2 aspects here that really apply. So I simplified it quite a bit. So I hope that's okay, Mike. I simplified the simplification.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Like, he talks about in the first part the different values, the aspirational values, the permission to play values, the accidental values. None of that really matters. Just pick the 1 sentence thing and make sure you're moving in the right direction.
Right.
From there, you can pick the additional values that are going to support your vision, but it doesn't need to be a big formal process. Now, he does say that there are 2 things that can help you identify your uniqueness, and I agree with these. They are the values and then also your strategy. Now, I think with the family context, the values are more important than the strategy. I really can't think of an outcome that we would want to achieve and tactically develop a strategy to achieve that goal where we could say, like, yes, now we've won, sort of a thing. Like, you can do that in business pretty easy. Like, our goal is to increase revenue, to this point, or launch this product or whatever. I think that those opportunities in a family setting are not nearly as consistent. More so, it's just the guiding principles, and we're going to use those to define, are we moving in the right direction? So yeah, I think that your approach is actually the better approach.
Yes, I win. Question number 2. What is your family's rallying cry right now? Now, rallying cry, that's a term I've heard quite a bit in corporate scenarios, and we used it a lot when I worked corporate. And I knew whenever my wife and I were holding this conversation that this is not a term she was going to be familiar with. So I didn't ask this question, verbatim. What I ended up saying was, okay, this summer, what is the most important thing for us to be working on? It doesn't have to apply to the answer to the first question, but given that this is the first time we're going through this, I'm going to guess that it probably will, just because we haven't done this process before. So in our case, it did apply. And again, I want to get to that later because I want to tie it all up with a nice pretty bow and hand it out whenever I'm done with all this. But, this is the thing where, okay, this next summer, what's the most important thing we need to do? And what ends up happening there is in the book, he then says, okay, this is the thing you should be doing, and then you need to break that down into defining objectives and then have your standard objectives. I think those were the terms he used. Core objectives?
Yep.
I'm even getting them wrong now, Mike.
That's because it's way too complicated. It doesn't need to be that complicated. In fact, I read this book after I had read another book, and I don't know if I mentioned this as a Gap book or not, but I recently read, based on a recommendation of Lucas Smith, who's somebody that I met locally here recently, who has actually done Scrum training with Jeff Sutherland, kind of like the Scrum godfather.
Yep.
So he knows his stuff, and he mentioned this book, The Secrets of Happy Families by Bruce Feiler, and he talks in there that there's a lot to this book. It's broken down into, I think, 10 different chapters. Each one tackles a different angle. The first one is really the reason why I got it. He talks about family scrum. So Bruce also has a TED Talk on agile programming for your family, which is really interesting. And he talks about, in the first couple chapters of this book, I can't remember specifically if it's the agile family chapter or not, but he uses a lot of, like, he talked to these families who have figured this out, and then he shares his experience applying it to his own family. And so they get to this section about values. And without defining all the different types of different values and the multiple levels of objectives, he's looking at this family who's defined these values. They've applied values to their own family, and they realize that, really these are not resonating with people. They don't really feel good about them, so they change them a little bit. Really the secret is they just sit down and talk about it, like, okay, so these aren't really working. What should we change? You don't need to understand all these different definitions, just what really works for you. And they landed on something that, like, everybody was super excited about, and it took one additional meeting for that to happen. And I kind of feel like that's all that's required, and it's just the consistency of the meeting. Like, don't try to figure this all out ahead of time, because whatever you figure out is going to be wrong. Whether it's right now, it's going to be wrong in a week or two. So just adapt and overcome.
Yeah. So I think with these two different sets of objectives, when we did it, we define, okay, what's the thing that's most important for us to work on this summer? Here it is. Now, what is it we need to do to hit that? To use some of the David Allen stuff. Okay, what's the next action? Like, what are the things we have to accomplish in order to say that was a success? And we ended up coming up with 3 things that we needed to do. And that's it. Like, stop there. Like, we didn't do this whole standard objective thing where, these are things we need to keep in mind so that they don't fall off the radar, like finances and our marriage and, time with our kids. Like, sure, we could say that stuff, but for us, it doesn't help. Like, that's not a helpful aspect of this. And I didn't really push this piece at all because I know that it's not, like, the most important thing for us is, what is the thing that makes us unique? What's the most important thing we need to be working on this summer? And how does that actually accomplish itself? Like, how do we do that? That's it. Like, stop there. Like, don't overcomplicate this. Like, those are the pieces that are, to me, to simplify, again, the simplified version. Like, that was the piece right there. It's like, okay, here's the goal. Here are the 3 things we need to do that, to accomplish it and say it's done. Go. Like, that's it. Like, that's as far as it went.
Yep. And so one of the notes that I wrote down here regarding question number 2, and specifically the standard objectives, because, again, a reason that the scorecard kind of bugs me is like, oh, we need to do all the things. We need to check all the boxes. No, standard objectives equals the wheel of life, in my opinion. And if you're following the 12-week year concept, the whole idea is that you'll never check all the boxes. You'll never be able to concentrate on all the different areas of your life at a time. You're going to pick 1 or 2, and you're going to work on those for the next couple months. And that is going to become your rallying cry for right now. And you can totally apply that to a family context as well.
All right, so question number 3. How do you talk about and use the answers to these questions? And I did not ask this question last night.
That's because you did it.
Yes. Here's the
There's
thing.
no definition of done required for this.
Correct.
Just talk.
Correct. Because here's the thing. My wife and I share breakfast together every morning. We have almost every single meal of the week together with our girls. And I work from home. She's a stay-at-home mom. We're around each other a lot. And if we take the answers to questions 1 and 2 and write them down, and we have a whiteboard that's sitting next to our kitchen table because of the homeschooling stuff we're doing, I can put those 2 things there on that whiteboard, and it immediately becomes a talking point every time we have a meal or something that's going on. So I don't really need to answer question number 3 here. How do you talk about this and use these answers? Well, it's going to be right in front of us all the time. And we're both excited enough about the goal that we're working on that it's a non-issue. This is not a thing that we're going to struggle with to talk about. We've already talked about it once today. And this was last night that this was decided.
Yep.
So I could break this down into, 2 questions almost, and then take question 2 and split it in half. That's, I'm going to use 1.5 questions here and accomplish what I think is the most important piece for our family.
Totally agree. And we've got more questions, but they're not related to standard and defining objectives. We also had our date night last night, and we've got a Google Doc that we set up for this because we want to have a record, but we're not tracking all of this stuff. We're just documenting it so that we can go back later if we want. If I feel like we've talked about this before, then I go back and I see the same thing written down 4 or 5 times. Then, okay, this is now becoming more of a priority. We need to figure out the system to solve this. But a lot of this is just identifying where things are at right now. And going back to the very beginning of this episode, this is where Jude totally dropped the ball. So our Google Doc here, first of all, we've got our check-in. So we're both busy, but we want to make sure that we know how the other person is feeling. We don't want to assume certain things. So, I'll have, how am I feeling about certain things that have happened in the last week? Rachel will respond, how she feels about certain things that have happened in the last week. And that's really valuable, just verbalizing your feelings to the other person, because a lot of times they don't know unless you explicitly say something. And maybe, I can tell based on her attitude or her facial expressions that she's feeling frustrated. But until she actually says hey, you're doing this and it's really bugging me, I don't know how to fix it. So that's really valuable. And then we've got what we call the retrospective. I think I've shared these questions before, but we have 3 questions that we ask, and we spend quite a bit of time just thinking about all the possible responses to these. So number 1, what should we start doing? Things that we know we want to do as a family. And there are a lot of tactical habit style things. And it's not all of these are going to be turned into, we're going to make sure that we complete these tasks or anything. Again, it's just verbalizing the different options that are available and taking the time to think about these things. So what should we start doing? What should we stop doing? And what should we keep doing? I can't tell you how much value we've gotten from asking those questions, because just in talking through the answers, you get a lot more context than you do by seeing dots colored in on a whiteboard. We can look at, what should we keep doing, and some of the things that we had written down here from the one that I'm looking at right now. We have just given up on doing anything else on Sundays other than church stuff. And I think that that's the right decision for a lot of different reasons. I think we even talked about that in the Matt Perman episode.
Right.
But that's working out really well. I'm not feeling stressed about trying to get all these other things done. We are honoring the Sabbath. And that's something that we want to continue to do. And another thing that I've mentioned on the podcast here, and we've been implementing pretty consistently. I think I've only missed 1 or 2, and we've made them up at these one-on-one days where once a week I am doing something one-on-one with one of my kids. So they rotate, each one has their own week, and typically it happens on Friday morning. Sometimes it's Saturday afternoons. Sometimes, it's earlier. But I've been doing these consistently, and we're seeing a lot of fruit from that intentionality. So we want to keep doing that. After we answer those 3 questions, then if there's something that really we need to make a decision about, those are going to be listed under talking points. So one of the talking points from this one that I'm looking at right now is toddler ministry for Rachel, ? Because she was asked to do this thing. And we talked about it. We got the answer. And if we hadn't put it on the list, maybe we would have gone to dinner, forgot about it. And then she gets asked again and, I guess maybe I should give it a shot, sort of a thing. Well, we decided because we talked about it that no, this wasn't the right thing. And that was the right decision, by the way. So I'm really happy that we did talk about that. She gets asked to do these studies for Kimberly-Clark, which is a local company. She's a professional photographer. So she has to go take pictures for their research studies. And one of the talking points was the homeschool workflow when Rachel has these studies, because we want to make sure that we stay consistent. And especially with Jonathan, who's the 6-year-old. So again, we figured out a formula for this because it was on the talking points here. And then I had proposed this crazy new family meeting format, which really just gets back to the point that I made earlier, that this stuff has to be constant progress. Don't be afraid to iterate. Don't be afraid to say, well, this didn't work for us. I mean, we're trying this out. It seems to work really well, but we talked about what the format should look like. And then at the very end, we've got the gratitude and happiness. So we specifically asked, and this is totally something I ripped off from Asian Efficiency, what would make you happier this week? And I have to have something specific that I can put here that Rachel can do to make me happy this week. And she has to have something specific that I can do this week to make her happy. And just to give you a really ridiculous and maybe kind of stupid example, I gave her a massage gift card for Christmas. It was a 1-hour massage, I think, and then a pedicure or something like that. So it's a pretty big deal. It's like 2 hours or something at the spa. And she hadn't used it yet. And this was from one I'm looking at right now. This was in March, I think. And within a week of doing this, we had carved out the time for her to go to the spa and take advantage of this thing. And I use this example because it's the perfect example for those types of things that you're like, I should really do that sometime, and you never get around to it. So just creating whatever structure you need and not going overboard. Not putting it all on a whiteboard. This is something that we can just type into on our phones when we're at dinner. And we're not sitting there like the typical couple who's going out to dinner, who have their heads buried in their phones and they're not talking to each other. We are talking to each other, and we're writing down the outcomes from this in a Google Doc. And so I've found a ton of value from this. And when I compared this to the structure that I read about in the 3 questions for a Frantic family, I was just like, have you even tried this, buddy? Like, there's no way this is going to work.
Yeah. I want to work through, I'll share the stuff that my wife and I came up with, because I think that would be helpful to folks to see an example of what this could look like. But before I do that, because this is going to transition us into action items and such, is there anything you want to go through before I do that?
That's basically it. I will mention under the model, and I just wrote this down. I don't know if this is something he referenced or not, but I put Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. I think he did write about this. Mm-hmm. But I think that you should apply that to everything he says. What is the thing that I can do from this book that'll give me 80% of the value for 20% of the effort? And then also he mentions don't make perfect the enemy of the good. And that's really where, like, the scoreboard and stuff, I feel like, at least for my situation, that would be trying to standardize something, and then as soon as you can't get to it, or you can't do it the way that you think you should, like, you're just not going to do it anymore. Figure out the thing that you can do and do it consistently.
Okay, so what my wife and I discovered when we got out of the house, because we left the house, had a babysitter, went and grabbed some ice cream, and then we went for a walk through some woods and got outside. It was next to the river in the area, and just had a good time just going for a walk. And then we went out for dinner afterwards. And partly because I had forewarned my wife I was going to bring up a crazy idea and have some questions to answer, she was able to work through this with me. And what we came up with for the answer to the first question, so what makes your family unique? We had a 9-word sentence. Our family thrives on white space and the outdoors. And that single directive sentence, although it does not include a lot of things that we find valuable, like there's some of the paragraphs that are written in the back that have things like we want to promote hardworking lifestyles for our children, and we want to focus on building our faith. Like, these are things that I'm not going to disagree with, but whenever we got to talking through this, like, okay, we thrive when we have white space. And that could mean in a time schedule. It could mean in our household. We tend to be minimalist of sorts. It could mean my mode of operation when it comes to how I operate with my clients. Like I have a very lean process that I work through on that, and I keep it clean. Like those are all aspects to that. But pieces like our faith, like, we like to leave blanks in our schedules so that we can act on our faith, which would mean time for Bible study in the morning because we're not rushing out the door. It could mean stopping to help someone who has a flat tire on the way to who knows where because we left ourselves some buffer to get there. Like things like that can start to come out just because of that white space bit. Like there's a lot of aspects where that is important. And we know from experience that that is something that we have a very high value on and can lead to a lot of the scenarios that we would want to put in this paragraph, but it's too wordy. Like we're minimalists. We like white space. Let's keep it simple. Like it's a very meta deal there. The outdoors bit is one that I think my wife and I both grew up being outside a lot. I grew up on a farm. She grew up with her parents. Her dad was a hunter and was outside a lot. You know, we've both been outdoors heavily in our past, and we want our girls to experience that as well. And we also know that having white space allows us to be outdoors, and we thrive in that scenario. So because of that, and having that in mind, we moved on to the second question of, you know, what's your family's rallying cry right now? Which I didn't ask in that way. It's like, okay, what's the most important thing we want to do this summer? And one thing, and we've been talking about this a little bit, in that we want to get outside and explore a lot of like the natural woodsy areas in our general region because we just haven't. My wife has a thing for foraging for mushrooms or trying to find wildlife outside to show our girls and such, and just exploring. And we haven't been very good at that. Like it's not a thing we've succeeded in accomplishing. So we set that as our goal for the summer. And, you know, it's very easy to just say, well, you don't really have any action items on that. Like, well, we're saying that we're going to do this, and like, okay, well, how often and where? Like, those are what we end up being the action items off of this. Is like, okay, well, we need to make sure that on a weekly basis, we are leaving the house and exploring either a new place or a new aspect of a place we've already been. So that would be step 1. 2, we have to figure out where these places are. Like we're in Minnesota, so there's a bunch of areas you can go. So we have to make sure we have the time for it, but on a weekly basis. And we also have to make sure that we have the right places that we can go. But it also means that we don't need to be reliant on weather. Like we want to make sure that we can get outside. If it's raining or not, who cares? We're going to go. And we want to make that a thing, which means there's a fair amount of equipment and like clothing that we don't own that makes this a problem. So there is a little bit of, I guess, equipment or supplies of sorts that we want to make sure that we pick up to enable this. I don't think that my wife and I would have ever reached that conclusion had we not sat down or walked to determine this. So it was very enlightening. And at the same time, we both came away from this feeling like we had a very solid and energizing plan for our summer. And we didn't feel like our summer was going to get away from us because we know what it is that we want to accomplish. And that's exactly what it is that we want to work towards accomplishing. So for that, I say thank you, Mr. Lencioni. And I didn't do all the stuff you wanted me to do, but I feel like it at least got us on the right path, and we're pretty excited about where it's going to take us.
You mentioned something regarding your one sentence, and I forget exactly how you said it, but basically the things that allow your family to thrive. And I think that that's very much in line with that other book that I had mentioned by Bruce F. I think that that's going back to the 80-20, that's the real value right there, is identifying what are the things that allow your family to thrive. And that's really what the rallying cry is, in my opinion. That's one of my action items, is I want to identify our family rallying cry. And it's like to put my family in a position to thrive, in particular this summer. So we're wrapping up a lot of the things that we had committed to in the winter and the spring. And now it's kind of like a blank slate, but that's opportunity and also a danger or a threat, because you can easily fill it with a bunch of things that, oh, we should do this. We should sign up for swimming lessons and we should do all of these things. And if you're not intentional or careful about it, pretty soon your entire week then is spoken for. So it's kind of a natural, or at least, built into the schedule type of a reset button. We want to figure out what are the things that we really want to do. And I specifically, after reading this book, I want to land on that one sentence rallying cry, which can just very easily determine whether this thing is a good fit or not. And I do want to create a scoreboard for our family plan. I just don't want to do it the way that Patrick Lencioni does it. So that will require some additional conversation with my wife, but I do want to follow up on that. We do have actually physically in our hallway, right by our kitchen, right in the middle of our house, mounted a whiteboard, which is perfect for this. But we need to figure out, what do we want to put on there? And it's not going to be 3 different levels of objectives.
Yes. This is the one action item I have, because we've already done the theoretical 3 questions, 2, 1.5, whatever you want to call it. We have that, but we're going to put that plan into action basically right away. I do want to put together a scoreboard for it, but by scoreboard, I'm just using his terminology. Basically, what that means is I want to write down this statement, this directive, and spell out what our goal and tasks are. And that could be very, very small and very simple. That maybe it's just a piece of paper that we tack to the whiteboard in the kitchen. That's probably what we're going to do, but I just need to physically do that.
Yep, totally agree.
So that said, author style and rating. Ready, set, go.
All right, Patrick Lencioni, I love you. I'm a huge fan of the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I am not a huge fan, I think, of this book, but I do really appreciate the fable aspect of it. So if you haven't read anything Patrick Lencioni, he's a really, really good storyteller. I didn't feel like this story was quite as good as the 5 dysfunctions story, but it's still pretty good. I do like the 3 questions. I feel like this book could have been 1/10 the length, because the first 2/3 of it is the fable, and then you finally land on the 3 questions. In fact, right. I don't think the 3 questions were explicitly stated in the fable, which was kind of weird. You had to go to the model to get them explicitly stated. I think the 3rd one specifically, he doesn't reference in the fable. At least I couldn't find it when I read it. It stood out to me, and I went back and tried to find it, and I couldn't. So I don't think this is Patrick Lencioni's best work. I think that there are better books in terms of family management. The one that I mentioned earlier, The Secrets of Happy Families, I feel like that speaks to this topic a lot more approachably than this one. There's some good information in here. I'm kind of conflicted at what to rate this at. I think I'm going to go with a 3.5 because I do think that there's some really good stuff in here, but I also feel like you really have to dig to get to it, and it's made more difficult than it needs to be. I feel like this could have been a lot more approachable, and the corporate bias definitely appears.
Yeah, I'll agree with you. I mean, Lencioni's easy to read. I mean, it's a story. It's tough to say that's complicated to read, and he's a pretty good writer with it. So, that's definitely a vote in his favor. I had a problem with the corporate speak. I've said that a few times here. I really wish he had changed that up, and I wish, even though he simplified it, I wish he had taken it further. Because this whole 2 levels of objectives bit like that, I understand what he's doing, but I feel like that's 1 level too far. So I wish he would have removed that. That said, having actually followed or attempted to follow the bulk of his intent, I know the feeling of having followed through on it and can say that is something I'm pretty excited about. I'm with you in the conflicted rating concept. Okay, the feeling I've had after going through this tells me it's definitely a 5, but at the same time, the corporate speak bit is a deterrent, so I can't do the 5. So I have to deduct 0.5 point for that for sure, and then I'll probably deduct another half for not going as far as I feel like he should have, and it would have been extremely helpful to have gone a little bit further. So I'm going to put it at a 4.0 for those reasons, but I do think this is a book I will recommend to a number of folks with some of the disclaimers that I have just mentioned. So I will probably continue to tell people that this is a book I feel like they should read. But I think I'm also with you in saying that Lencioni does have some other books that I would say are better, but not geared towards families. Like, he's definitely a leadership writer, and he's good at that. And this is like his attempt at a family-driven book, but he's a leadership writer. So it's hard for him to let that go. Like that was kind of my complaint.
Yeah, it feels kind of out of place. Like, even if you had somebody who was struggling in their family situation, I think I'd recommend The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team over The 3 Big Questions for a Frantic Family. Which is just kind of weird, but it is what it is. I just feel like this is a little bit out of his wheelhouse. All right, upcoming books then. Next one is my pick. And this is interesting because there was somebody who mentioned on the Bookworm Club, which I know we'll get to in a second, about reading the classics. And this is one of those that I think classifies as a self-development or productivity classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. So this is my choice. And I picked it specifically because there seems to be very polarizing opinions of this book. Either it's amazing or people just really dislike the idea. They kind of think it's about manipulating people. I want to get to the bottom of it. I don't anticipate that it's about that at all. But I think that just based off of the title, I can see how people would interpret it that way. So I want to understand what's really going on here.
The book following that is my choice, which is Peak by Anders Ericsson. And this is a listener recommendation. So I kind of went through some recommendations here a little while back and was picking ones that I thought seemed interesting. And this one is about developing your skills and expertise in a given area, and like how to improve, whether it's an academic goal or athletic or musical skills or acquiring new skills. Like, that's what he's talking about. So, secrets from the new science of expertise. So I think it'll be kind of interesting.
Nice. Yeah, it does sound interesting. For Gap Books, I'm reading one right now, which is The Richest Man in Babylon by George Clason, I believe is how you pronounce this. This is another quote-unquote classic productivity book or financial literacy book, I guess. If you liked The Monk and the Merchant, you would definitely like this one because it's written as a narrative, and a lot of the principles are distilled throughout the narrative. But it is specifically regarding principles of wealth building. So I don't know. It's an entertaining way to learn how to manage your money, I guess.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting. It kind of goes somewhat along with the one I just wrapped up reading this, The $1 Million One-Person Business. This is by Elaine Pofelt. I think I got her name right. Basically, it is about how to build a business that reaches $1 million in revenue as a single person, which I am not sure that's my target, but the concept of building a business that could scale has been of great interest to me, especially lately. So I just finished this. It's one that I would recommend if you're interested in building a business of your own. So she does a pretty good job of laying out a lot of complicated principles in that world. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. So if you're interested in building a business on your own, as not a contractor, but like a single person, solopreneur sort of thing, it's one I would recommend if you're in that scenario.
Very cool. All right. And if you want to recommend a book, you can do that from the website. If you go to bookworm.fm/list, you will see a list of the planned books, the ones that we've completed. And then the list of recommendations is actually now hosted on the Bookworm Club. But on that list page, there is a button to recommend a book, and that will take you right to where you can recommend a book. My wife literally did this yesterday while we were out for a walk.
Awesome.
So that's where you want to go if you want to see what's planned or if you want to influence what's planned.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. I moved all of the recommendations we had on the Bookworm FM site and put them on the Bookworm Club, which means that you get a couple things whenever you do that. Is one, you can actually vote for books now if they've made it onto a recommended list. So if there's one on that list that you want to try to promote to get on the podcast, that is the way to do it. Because sometimes I get recommendations that come through and you get them multiple times, but we haven't had a way to weight those and rate them or show that weight publicly. So now we have a way to do that. So you can go to that recommendations category on the Bookworm Club to see that. If you're not a member of the club, you should become a member of the club. We have 1 or 2 things that we're potentially going to be doing here in the near future that would be exclusive to club members. So just keep that in mind. But yes, we'd love to see you on the club. It's where we have conversations about the episodes, and people can ask questions, just clarification, that sort of thing. So that's one way that you can help us out. There's also a lot of Amazon affiliate links there that you can click on that help us support the show. And the way that you can promote it is with an iTunes review, which there's a link in the show notes down below for that you can click on and leave us a review there as well. Are we still fighting KCRW, Mike? I don't check on this stuff.
Yes, we are.
Okay, so we're still trying to take down KCRW. Correction, Mike is still trying to take down KCRW as the #1 listing when you search for Bookworm on iTunes. So if you don't mind, help us out, leave us a review there, and someday we'll take them down.
Yeah, and to be honest, like I don't think it's an apples to apples comparison. I definitely think that we are more in line with the definition of a podcast book club. So I'm going to go ahead and say join the Bookworm Club and join the internet's largest book club.
All right.
Unverified. So you can do that at, is it club.bookworm.fm?
Yes, club.bookworm.fm.
All right, so check out club.bookworm.fm, and if you're reading along, then pick up How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, and we will talk to you next time.